On Father's Day, I made a reservation at our usual restaurant and waited for my son to call. When he did, he said, "I'm sorry, Dad. Something came up." So I went alone. Minutes later, I froze outside a private dining room in that same restaurant. My son was already there, laughing with his wife and her mother, champagne in hand, as if I had never existed. Then I overheard a conversation that made my blood run cold. And in that moment, everything I had planned for his future changed forever. If you found your way to this video today, I am thankful for that. Before the story begins, tell me where you are watching from. Country city, wherever home is for you right now. It means more than you know. This story contains fictional elements crafted for dramatic and educational purposes. Similarities to real names or locations are unintentional, but what this story has to say about family and trust, that part is entirely worth your time. My name is Richard Carter. I am 65 years old, and tonight I am eating alone on Father's Day. That sentence used to feel impossible to say out loud. Tonight it feels like the most honest thing I have said in months. There was a time not long ago, 2 years at the outside, when I had a different version of tonight planned entirely. Not Father's Day dinner at Maison Laurent. Something larger. A private dinner at the house in Connecticut. The good china, the wine I had been saving since 2015 for an occasion that deserved it. I had intended to tell Ethan over that dinner that I was ready. That Carter Global was his. That everything I had spent 40 years building in this city was going to pass to him the way a man passes something to his son, not out of obligation, but out of pride. Out of the specific, uncomplicated love of a father who looks at his child and sees the continuation of something worth continuing. I had the speech prepared. I had never given it. Some decisions protect themselves by never being made. I stood in my closet for a long time before leaving the house. I pulled on my old charcoal overcoat, the one with the frayed left cuff and the slightly worn collar. My housekeeper, Mrs. Paulson, had offered to replace it 3 times this year alone. Each time I told her no. There are things a man keeps not because he needs them, but because they remind him of who he was when everything still mattered. I buttoned the coat, slowly checked my reflection in the mirror, and walked out the door. The drive from Connecticut into Manhattan took just under an hour. I kept the radio off. The city appeared gradually through the windshield, first the distant glow of the bridges, then the towers climbing above the horizon, like old friends who never called anymore. I have spent 4 decades building pieces of this skyline. Tonight, the skyline felt entirely indifferent to me. My phone rang when I was crossing into Midtown. I recognized the number immediately and felt something lift inside my chest, a small, embarrassing flicker of hope that a 65-year-old man should probably know better than to feel. I answered before the second ring. "Ethan," I said, and I could hear the warmth in my own voice, unguarded and genuine. "I was just thinking about you." "Hey, Dad." His voice was smooth, relaxed, carrying that casual confidence he had perfected sometime in his late 20s and never put down. "Listen, I am going to have to take a rain check on tonight. Something came up." My fingers tightened slightly on the steering wheel, though I kept my voice easy. "Something came up," I repeated. "On Father's Day." I know." He exhaled, not quite a sigh, more like a man shifting a mild inconvenience from one hand to the other. "It is a networking thing. A private fundraiser. Some people I absolutely cannot afford to miss, you understand. It is the kind of room that does not open its doors twice." "Of course," I said. "You are the best dad. We will do dinner next week, I promise. Something nice. You pick the place." A pause, the sound of voices in the background music underneath them. He was already somewhere. He had been somewhere before he even called. "Happy Father's Day." The line went quiet. I set the phone on the seat beside me and kept driving. The restaurant was 4 blocks ahead. I had made the reservation 3 weeks ago, a corner table at Maison Laurent, the kind of place where the lighting is always low and the steaks arrive without anyone having to ask twice. I had planned to order the bone-in ribeye. I had planned to share a bottle of the 2018 Napa Cabernet I knew Ethan enjoyed. I pulled up to the valet stand anyway. A young attendant in a red jacket opened my door with a practiced smile. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to Maison Laurent." "Thank you," I said, and climbed out into the cool June air. The maitre d' recognized me at the door, a tall man named Philippe, who had been working this room for as long as I had been coming to it. He shook my hand warmly, glanced once behind me, at the empty space where a guest might have stood, and to his great credit, said nothing about it. "Mr. Carter, wonderful to see you. Your table is ready." He led me through this dining room. Around me, the restaurant hummed with the specific energy of a Sunday evening. Couples leaning close over candlelight, families crowding into booths, a grandfather at the table nearest the window, letting his granddaughter stack sugar cubes on the back of his hand, while her parents laughed and refilled their glasses. A young boy no older than 7 or 8 was wearing a paper crown someone had folded from a napkin, pointing at something on the menu with tremendous seriousness, while his father nodded along as though it were the most important decision either of them would make all year. I watched them as I passed. Philippe pulled out my chair at the corner table. I sat down, unfolded my napkin, and placed it across my lap with the automatic precision of a man who has eaten in restaurants like this one more times than he can count. A server appeared with the wine list. I waved it off. "Whiskey," I said. "Neat. Whatever your best single malt is tonight." "Of course, Mr. Carter." He disappeared. I straightened the silverware in front of me, a small, pointless habit, and looked across the table at the empty chair. It was a perfectly ordinary chair. White linen candlelight catching the edge of the unused wine glass, a folded napkin waiting for hands that were not coming. My chest did something then that I had not expected. Not a dramatic collapse, not the kind of pain that announces itself loudly. It was quieter than that, and somehow worse, a slow tightening like a fist closing around something soft, something I had spent years convincing myself was already gone. The whiskey arrived. I wrapped my hand around the glass and felt the warmth of it against my palm. "Will anyone be joining you this evening, Mr. Carter?" the server asked, his voice professionally gentle. I opened my mouth to answer, and in that half-second before the words came, I made a decision about how I was going to carry this particular evening. Not with self-pity, not with the kind of quiet devastation that turns a man inward and keeps him there, but with the same steady composure I had applied to every difficult thing in my life. "No," I said. "Just me tonight." He nodded and withdrew. I took a sip of the whiskey, let it settle, and looked around the room one more time at the grandfather and his paper-crowned granddaughter, at the couple by the window, at the boy who had finished deliberating over the menu and was now tugging at his father's sleeve with something urgent to say. I turned back to my table. I picked up the menu, and then from somewhere across the dining room I heard a laugh, a sharp, bright, entirely familiar laugh, the kind that carries across a crowded room without trying, the kind I had heard 10,000 times rising from the bottom of a staircase on Christmas morning, from the back seat of a car on summer road trips, from the other side of a phone line on birthdays and graduations and ordinary Tuesday evenings when the world was still whole. My hand stopped moving. The laugh came again, louder now, followed by the crystal ring of a champagne glass being raised. I set the menu down very carefully, the way a man sets something down when his hands have started to betray him, and I turned toward the sound. I have spent 40 years learning to read a room before I walk into it, not in business schools, but in the years before any of that, when reading a situation correctly was the difference between closing a deal and losing everything. So I did not move immediately. I turned slowly toward the sound and let my eyes travel across the dining room until they found the source. The private room at Maison Laurent sits behind frosted glass panels near the back. Decorative, expensive, and not nearly as opaque as management probably intends. From the right angle, with the door open 2 inches, which it was, you can hear everything. I recognized Ethan's voice first. Then the sharper register of a woman's laugh I had heard twice before at family dinners and found grating both times. Vanessa, my daughter-in-law, who had a talent for making warmth sound like a performance. I walked toward the back at a pace that suggested nothing unhurried, deliberate. I stopped just outside the open door, where the shadow of a pillar gave me enough cover. The ambient noise of the dining room had dropped in the way that large rooms sometimes drop between courses, briefly collectively, as though the building itself had taken a breath, and in that interval every word from the private room arrived with the clean clarity of a broadcast. Ethan was in a curved leather booth jacket, off-tie, loosened, arranged in the posture of a man, without a single concern in the world. Beside him, Vanessa held a champagne flute. Across from them, Gloria Sterling held court with the confidence of a woman who had never once paid for her own dinner. Tonight she was working through a plate of oysters with the enthusiasm of someone eating on someone else's account, which I realized with cold clarity she was. "The point," Gloria said, her tone sharpening beneath the social veneer, "is that the current arrangement is not sustainable. Richard puttering around that house, showing up in that coat, making decisions about a company Ethan should be running." She paused. "There are very good facilities in New Jersey. Quiet, clean, affordable." "Without getting in the way," Ethan finished. He said it easily, conversationally. "The way you might say it is going to rain tomorrow." As though warehousing his father in a budget care facility were a logistical inconvenience he had already emotionally processed and moved past. My fingers pressed into the pillar so hard my knuckles ached. "Once Ethan has the CEO title locked in," Vanessa said, swirling her champagne, "we handle the rest quietly. Quick, clean, no drama." Gloria smiled, slow, satisfied, cold. "To the future," she said. "To the future," Vanessa echoed. They drank. I released the pillar. My fingers were white. My jaw ached from clenching it without realizing. I walked back through the dining room at the same unhurried pace, nodded once to Philippe, and pushed through the front door into the Manhattan night. The air hit my face like cold water. I stood on the sidewalk while the city moved around me, cabs, music from an open window, a couple arguing about which direction to walk. My throat felt like something hard and permanent had lodged itself there. He had not forgotten it was Father's Day. He had chosen this instead. I pulled out my phone. My thumb moved without trembling. Marcus answered on the second ring. "Sir?" Just that. "Marcus," I said, "clear your evening. We have work to do." The valet brought my car around in under 3 minutes. I tipped him without looking at the bill, got behind the wheel, and pulled into midtown traffic, with Marcus Webb's voice on speaker filling the cabin. "Talk to me," Marcus said. No preamble. 20 years had burned away every social formality between us. I told him everything. The private dining room, the champagne, Gloria's research on New Jersey facilities, Ethan's easy agreement. Then the part that had settled into my chest like a stone. "He used the word quietly," I said. "He said they would handle it quietly." Marcus exhaled long and controlled the breath of a man managing his reaction before allowing himself to speak. "Richard," he said, "I need you to listen carefully. What I am about to tell you is going to change the shape of this conversation." "Go ahead." I have been building a file on Ethan's expenditure patterns for the past 11 weeks. My hands did not tighten on the wheel, but something behind my sternum contracted sharply because Marcus Webb was not a man who built files on hunches. 11 weeks, I said. The pattern started in the second quarter reports. Vendor payments I did not recognize. Expense approvals without standard secondary sign-off. A pause. I did not want to hand you a theory, Richard. I wanted to hand you a case. I drove and let him talk. Irregularities in the expenditure record, he continued. Significant ones. The kind that do not happen by accident. The kind that require planning. I thought about Ethan in that leather booth, champagne in hand, laughing about handling me quietly. Lock his corporate card, I said. Tonight. All authorization privileges suspended effective immediately. Already drafted the suspension order, Marcus said. I was waiting for your call. There it was. As chairman and controlling shareholder, I said, I am formally authorizing a full audit, every vendor payment, every wire transfer, every expense approval. Ethan touched across all subsidiaries for the past 24 months. External forensic team only. No one inside the building except you and Claire Donovan. Understood. I will invoke your authority under Delaware corporate governance provisions. No advance notice required to any officer below board level. Ethan cannot block it. How long for a preliminary picture? 8 a.m., Marcus said. Good. I took the exit toward Connecticut. The card suspension hits him tonight. He will notice. I am counting on it, I said. An innocent man calls his CFO and asks for an explanation. A guilty man calls his wife and starts recalculating. The gates of my property came into view, gravel crunching under the tires. I sat in the parked car with the engine off, looking at the dark windows of the house. My phone buzzed. A forwarded notification through the security application Marcus had installed 18 months ago. Transaction attempt. Carter Global Corporate Card. Wine Merchant, Upper East Side. 9:52 p.m. Declined. Somewhere across the city, Ethan Carter had just watched a card come back rejected. I knew the expression that would have crossed his face. I had seen it before on adversaries, on competitors, on men whose confidence was built on borrowed foundations. I had never expected to see it on my son. Inside, I poured 2 fingers of scotch I did not drink. I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad, uncapped a pen, and wrote Marcus Webb's name at the top. Below it, one word: everything. I did not sleep. I sat at the kitchen table until the sky outside the window shifted from black to the particular deep blue that arrives about an hour before sunrise. Not dawn yet, just the world's first reluctant acknowledgement that another day is coming, whether anyone is ready for it or not. I drank 2 cups of coffee that went cold before I finished them, and I read through the notes I had made on the legal pad until the handwriting stopped looking like my own. At 6:15 in this morning, I went upstairs, showered, and put on the old charcoal overcoat. I want to be precise about that detail because it matters. I did not put on the overcoat out of habit or absent-mindedness. I put it on deliberately, the way a soldier picks up a specific piece of equipment before going into the field, not because it is the most impressive thing he owns, but because it is the most reliable. I drove south through Connecticut and into New Jersey without the radio, without a podcast, without anything between me and the road and the thing I had decided I needed to do. The address had not been difficult to find. Gloria Sterling was not a careful woman. With her search habits, she had discussed the facility by name in that private dining room at Maison Laurent, her voice carrying the casual confidence of someone who had done their research and was pleased with the result. Meadow Glen Care and Rehabilitation Center, The name had the cheerful, scrubbed quality of a place that had been named by a marketing consultant hired to make something depressing sound storative. I found it on a county road outside of Parsippany, a low, flat complex of connected buildings, the color of old cement, surrounded by a parking lot that was half empty at 7:40 in the morning, and a strip of lawn that someone had mowed recently, but not enthusiastically. I parked, buttoned my coat, and walked to the front entrance. The woman at the reception desk was perhaps 30, with the particular brand of cheerful exhaustion that belongs to people who work night shifts, transitioning into day shifts, and have made a private peace with the fluorescent lighting. She looked up when I came through the door, and her face arranged itself into a professional smile. "Good morning. Can I help you?" "Good morning," I said. "I am here to visit my uncle, Walter Reed." I had chosen the name on the drive down common enough, specific enough, not the kind of name that prompted follow-up questions. "He was admitted last month. I apologize for coming so early. I have a flight this afternoon, and this was the only window I had." She typed something, frowned very slightly at her screen, then looked back up. "I am not seeing a Walter Reed in our current resident directory. Is it possible he is at our sister facility in—" "You know what, I may have the wrong location," I said, with the self-deprecating half-laugh of a man who has made an understandable administrative error. "My sister handles most of the arrangements. She may have told me Parsippany when she meant the other one. Would it be all right if I just walked through? Briefly, I drove 90 minutes, and I would hate to leave without at least seeing what the facility looks like in case this is where he ends up." She hesitated for exactly 1 second, the hesitation of a person weighing policy against the sight of a 65-year-old man in a worn overcoat who had driven 90 minutes to see his uncle. Policy lost. "Of course," she said. "Just sign in here, please. I will have someone walk you through the common areas." A young aide named Brett, 20s, kind, eyes the slightly overwhelmed energy of someone 2 years into a job that asked more than it advertised, gave me the tour. He walked me through the main corridor, past the dining room where the breakfast service was in its final stages, past a recreation room where a television was playing a morning news program to 4 residents who may or may not have been watching it, and out into the small courtyard garden that ran along the south side of the building. I listened to Brett explain the activity schedule, the therapy programs, the ratio of staff to residents. I nodded at the right moments. I asked the kind of questions a concerned family member asks, and I looked. I looked at the hallway floors, which were clean but worn in the particular way of floors that have been cleaned 10,000 times and will be cleaned 10,000 more. I looked at the dining room chairs, which were plastic and stackable and functional and nothing else. I looked at a woman in a wheelchair near the window of the recreation room, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes on the middle distance somewhere beyond the television, and beyond the wall, and beyond anything Brett or I could see from where we were standing. And then, in the courtyard, I saw him. An old man, late 70s, maybe 80, wearing a cardigan that was slightly too large for him, was sitting in a plastic chair beside a concrete planter that held a rosemary bush. He was not doing anything. He was not reading, not watching, not sleeping. He was simply sitting, his hands loose on his thighs, his face tilted up toward the morning sky with the patience of a man who has learned that patience is the only currency that still spends. There was no one with him. There was no chair pulled up beside his. There was no half-finished coffee, no book left open, face down on the planter, no evidence of any recent visitor or any expected one. Brett was saying something about the garden renovation they were planning for next spring. I stopped walking. "Would it be all right if I sat for a moment?" I said. The drive was long, and I gestured vaguely at my chest, the universal shorthand of a man of a certain age, referencing a body that occasionally requires accommodation. Of course," Brett said immediately. "Take your time. I will be right inside if you need anything." He went back through the glass door. I walked to the concrete planter and sat down in the empty plastic chair beside the old man. He turned his head and looked at me. His eyes were clear, clearer than I had expected, sharp and evaluating, in the way of a man whose mind had not gone anywhere, even if his body had decided to stop cooperating. "You are not a family member," he said. "Not an accusation. Just an observation, delivered with the mild certainty of someone who has had enough visitors and non-visitors to know the difference." "No," I said, "I am not." He nodded, accepting this without apparent concern, and turned his face back toward the sky. "Nice coat," he said. My throat tightened so abruptly and so completely that for a moment I could not have spoken even if I had known what to say. I pressed my back teeth together and breathed through my nose and looked out at the rosemary bush, which smelled clean and sharp in the morning air, and I stayed very still until the tightening passed. We sat together for perhaps 4 minutes. We did not discuss anything of consequence. At one point he asked me what month it was, and I told him, and he said that he had thought it was later than that, and I said that it had gone quickly this year, and he agreed that it had. When I stood up to leave, he raised one hand in a small, economical wave. I walked back through the facility signed out at the front desk and returned to my car. I sat behind the wheel for a long moment, both hands resting on my thighs, and I looked through the windshield at the low gray building and the half-empty parking lot and the strip of lawn that someone had mowed, but not enthusiastically. My eyes burned not from crying. I was not crying, but from the particular strain of holding your face completely still when something inside it wants very badly to move. I pulled out my phone and called Harold Brennan. He answered on the third ring, his voice carrying the comfortable roughness of a man who had been awake for a while but was in no particular hurry. Harold Brennan had spent 31 years on the federal bench. He had presided over cases that had broken other men's hearts. He had learned somewhere in those 31 years how to receive bad news without flinching and how to sit with someone who was carrying it. "Richard," he said, "it is early." "I know," I said. I needed to hear a reasonable voice. A pause. "Where are you?" "New Jersey, Parsippany." I looked at the building again. I came to see the place they picked out for me. The silence that followed was not empty. It was the silence of a man absorbing something that had hit him harder than he had prepared for, reorganizing himself around it before he spoke. "Richard," Harold said, and his voice had changed lower now, the professional distance gone, just one old friend talking to another. "How are you holding up?" And that question, so simple, so direct, so entirely without agenda, did something to my chest that the whole long night and the 90-minute drive and the old man in the courtyard had not quite managed to do. I felt something crack open just slightly, just enough to let the air in. "I am fine, Harold," I said. And then, because Harold had known me for 38 years and would see straight through anything less than the full truth, I needed to see it for myself. I needed to understand exactly what we are dealing with. "And now you do," Harold said. "Now I do," I said. Harold exhaled slowly. "What do you want to do, Richard?" I started the engine. The car hummed to life around me, solid and familiar, and I put it in reverse and backed out of the parking space and turned toward the highway north. "Everything, Harold," I said. "I am going to do everything." Marcus was already in my office when I arrived. He had not waited in the reception area or the conference room down the hall. He was sitting in one of the 2 leather chairs across from my desk, a thick folder open across his knees, a coffee going cold on the side table beside him. He had been there long enough for the coffee to go cold. That told me everything I needed to know about what was in the folder. He stood when I came through the door, I waved him back down, hung my overcoat on the rack by the window, and settled into my chair. "Talk," I said. Marcus did not ease into it. He was not built for easing into things. He placed the folder on the desk between us, opened it to the first tabbed section, and began. Over the past 24 months, Ethan has authorized 114 payments to external vendors through Nexus Capital, he said. 61 of those payments are clean, legitimate contractors, verified services, proper documentation. The remaining 53 payments total approximately $430,000. Every single one of them shares the same characteristics. He tapped the page. Vague service descriptions. No verifiable deliverables. Vendor entities that did not exist before the first payment was made to them. I looked at the spreadsheet he had prepared. The numbers were laid out in clean columns, dates, amounts, vendor names, approval signatures. Ethan's initials appeared beside each flagged entry, with the casual regularity of a man who had stopped being careful because he had stopped being afraid. The largest single cluster, Marcus continued, runs through a company called Sterling Creative LLC. 17 payments over 14 months. Total outflow. He paused, and I could see in the set of his jaw that he had been sitting with this number since before sunrise and had not yet made his peace with it. $264,000. The name Sterling Creative hit me like a door swinging open onto a room I had not known existed. Sterling. Vanessa's maiden name. Her mother's name. "Tell me about Sterling Creative," I said. "Registered in Delaware 14 months ago. Single member LLC. Listed business purpose is brand consulting and creative services." Marcus closed that section and opened the next. "There is no website. No listed clients other than Nexus Capital. No physical office address beyond a registered agent in Wilmington. The sole member of record," he slid a single page across the desk toward me, "is Vanessa Sterling Carter." I read the document. My jaw tightened and I let it because Marcus had earned the right to see whatever crossed my face in this room. "She built the pipeline herself," I said. "With Gloria Sterling's guidance, I would estimate," Marcus said. "The timing of the LLC registration aligns with a period when Gloria visited New York for 3 weeks. I cannot prove that connection yet. But the structure has her fingerprints all over it. It is not the work of someone who invented this approach from scratch." I sat back in my chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment, not because I needed to think, but because I needed to organize what I already knew into the shape it was going to have to take going forward. Here was the problem with calling the authorities today. If I handed this file to federal investigators right now, Ethan would lawyer up before noon. The charges, corporate expense fraud, unauthorized payments to a related party, were serious, but they were the kind of serious that expensive defense attorneys turn into procedural arguments and continuances that stretch across years. Ethan would walk out of the building on his own recognizance, hire the best white-collar defense firm in Manhattan, and spend the next 18 months making my life as complicated as possible while the case inched through the courts. I needed something cleaner. I needed wire fraud, a federal charge that moved faster, hit harder, and left substantially less room for procedural maneuvering. And to get wire fraud, I needed Ethan to authorize a significant electronic transfer to Sterling Creative that I could document from initiation to receipt, which meant I needed to give him a reason to do it. "I am going to assign him a project," I said. Marcus looked up from the folder. "What kind of project?" "Commercial acquisition. A building in Brooklyn, the Carver Street property. Mixed-use, commercially zoned, looks attractive on paper." I reached into my desk drawer and retrieved a thin manila folder I had prepared 2 weeks ago for an entirely different purpose. I set it on top of Marcus's audit materials. The property has a title dispute that has been running in Kings County Court for 19 months. Ethan will not know that unless he looks, and he will not look unless he has learned to look, which, I gestured at the spreadsheet between us. He has not. Marcus was quiet for a moment, turning this over. You want him to sign a letter of intent. I want him to sign it within 48 hours of receiving the file, I said. Without due diligence, without running it past legal. Because that is what he does. He moves fast and assumes someone else will catch what he missed. When the title dispute surfaces and the LOI triggers the penalty clause, we will have a clear picture of how he makes decisions under pressure. And when he turns to Sterling Creative to absorb the cost, we have the wire, Marcus said. We have the wire, I confirmed. A knock at the office door broke the thread of the conversation. I called out to come in, and the door opened to admit a young man carrying 2 bound reports and a tablet medium height, dark hair, the slightly pressed quality of someone who had ironed his shirt that morning, even though no one had asked him to. The Harrington Street comps you requested, Mr. Carter, he said, setting the reports on the corner of my desk with the careful precision of someone who understood that other people's workspaces were not his to disturb. And the updated Q2 variance analysis you asked for last Thursday. I flagged 3 line items on page 9 that I thought might need your attention before the board packet goes out. He had flagged them himself, without being asked. Thank you, Tommy, I said. Tommy Reyes had been on the 41st floor for 9 months. He nodded professional and unhurried, and left the way he had come. Marcus watched the door close. That kid Tommy Reyes has been here 8 months, Marcus said. 9, I said. Marcus looked at me with the particular expression he wore when he had understood something I had not yet said out loud. He looked back down at the audit folder, then at the Brooklyn file, then at the closed door. All right, he said. How do you want to send Ethan the Brooklyn project? Route it through his VP inbox as a standard acquisition opportunity, I said. My name nowhere on the transmittal. I want him to think he found it. Marcus allowed himself the smallest possible smile, the compressed, controlled version that was the closest he ever came to satisfaction during working hours. He picked up both folders, squared them against the edge of the desk, and stood. I will have it in his inbox by noon, he said. Good. I reached for the cold coffee Marcus had abandoned and discovered it was worse than I had expected. I drank it anyway. There was one more call I needed to make before the day was done to a man named Daniel Holt, whom I had retained 3 weeks earlier through a blind engagement precisely for a moment like this one. And Marcus. He stopped at the door. 11 weeks, I said. You watched this for 11 weeks before you said anything. He met my eyes steadily. I needed to be certain, he said. You deserved certainty. I nodded once and he left. The Brooklyn file landed in Ethan's inbox at 12:04 in the afternoon. I know the exact time because Marcus confirmed the transmittal, and I know what happened next because Marcus had been monitoring Ethan's activity logs since the previous night. Ethan opened the file at 12:11, 7 minutes after it arrived. He was eating lunch at his desk. Marcus could see from the system metadata that 3 other application windows were open simultaneously, which meant Ethan reviewed the Brooklyn acquisition summary, the same way he reviewed most things that did not immediately threaten him, quickly, partially, and with considerable confidence in his own first impressions. At 12:47, 36 minutes after opening the file, Ethan called Vanessa. I was not in the room for that call, but Daniel Holt, who had been running surveillance on Ethan's communications since that morning at my request, sent me a transcript before 2 o'clock. The transcript read word for word, "Baby, I just got handed something interesting," Ethan said. "Commercial property in Brooklyn. Mixed use, great location, the numbers look strong." "How strong?" Vanessa asked. Her voice carried the focused attention she reserved for financial information. Strong enough that I want to move fast before someone else flags it, Ethan said. I am going to put an LOI in today. Did legal review it? I do not need legal to review a letter of intent. It is preliminary. It is non-binding. A pause from Vanessa. Ethan, your father's team, is not involved, he said, and his voice carried the particular edge of a man who had grown tired of a sentence he had heard too many times. This came through my VP channels. It is my call. I am signing it today. He signed it at 3:17 that afternoon. I sat with that information for a long time after Marcus sent it through. 3 hours and 13 minutes from receiving the file to executing a letter of intent on a $14 million commercial property. No title search, no independent appraisal, no call to our legal team. Just Ethan Carter moving fast, absolutely certain that speed was the same thing as intelligence. Meanwhile, on the 41st floor of the same building, Tommy Reyes was still reading. I had asked Marcus to quietly route the same Brooklyn file to Tommy the previous afternoon, framed as a routine research assignment. No deadline, no stakes attached. What I did not tell Marcus was that I already knew what Tommy would find, and that I needed to see how long it would take him to find it. Tommy came to my office at 4:50 on the third day. He knocked, twice opened the door when I called out, and stood in the doorway with a printed report held carefully in both hands, as though he was aware that what it contained was worth treating carefully. Mr. Carter, he said, I finished the Brooklyn analysis you asked for. Come in, Tommy. Sit down. He sat in the chair across from my desk, the same chair Marcus had occupied 3 days earlier, and placed the report on the desk between us. It was 12 pages. He had printed it, hole-punched it, and bound it with a binder clip. The cover page had a date, a subject line, and his name in the bottom right corner. The property looks strong on the surface, he began, but there is a title dispute that has been running in Kings County Supreme Court for 19 months. The current owner has a competing claim from a prior lien holder whose interest was never formally discharged in the 2019 refinancing. Any LOI signed before that dispute resolves creates exposure. He paused. Significant exposure. The penalty clause in the standard commercial LOI template we use runs to $180,000 if the buyer withdraws after the due diligence window closes. He set a single page on top of the report, the Kings County Court docket printed from the public filing system, the case number highlighted in yellow. I thought you should see it before anything moves forward, he said. I looked at the highlighted case number. I looked at the date Tommy had pulled the docket day 2 of his research. He had found it on day 2 and spent day 3 verifying it. How did you find this? I asked. Tommy shifted slightly in the chair, not uncomfortable, just precise. Title chain review is standard on any acquisition over $2 million, he said. I ran the property through the county recorder's database and cross-referenced the lien history. It took about 40 minutes. 40 minutes. Ethan had spent 36 minutes to decide to commit $14 million of company capital. Tommy had spent 40 minutes to discover why he should not. Good work, I said. Leave the report. He nodded, stood, straightened the chair behind him, and left. I sat for a moment with both documents in front of me. Tommy's 12-page report on the left. Marcus's transmittal confirmation of Ethan's LOI signature on the right. Same property, same information, same 41-story building. I picked up Tommy's report and placed it in the top drawer of my desk. Then I picked up my phone and called Marcus. The LOI went through, I said. Confirmed, Marcus said. 3:17 this afternoon. Good. I looked out the window at the late afternoon light laying itself across the Manhattan skyline in long gold bars. Let the penalty clause run. Do not intervene. A beat. Understood. Marcus paused. There is one more thing, sir. My monitoring flagged an inquiry this afternoon, a background search request submitted through a private investigation firm. The subject of the inquiry. Another pause, this one waited. Is you. My hand tightened around the phone. Ethan hired a private investigator, Marcus said. What is the name of the firm? I asked. Marcus checked his notes. Sentinel Consulting Group. Lower Manhattan address registered 18 months ago. Single operator. He looked up. The investigator's name is Daniel Holt. I set the phone down on my desk, and for the first time since Father's Day, I felt something that was not grief or anger or cold strategic calculation. It was something considerably closer to relief. Marcus, I said, call Daniel Holt and tell him I said hello. The silence that followed lasted exactly 4 seconds. I counted them. You already know him, Marcus said. It was not a question. I retained him 3 weeks ago, I said. He operates under the Sentinel name for exactly this kind of situation, clients who need parallel coverage without creating a paper trail that connects back to Carter Global. His contract with me carries no exclusivity clause, which means he was entirely free to accept Ethan's engagement. I picked the phone back up, which means that everything Ethan tells Daniel Holt in the course of this investigation will be reported to me within 24 hours. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said with the restrained appreciation of a man who did not impress easily, "That is elegant, Richard." "Thank you, Marcus," I said. "Get me Daniel on the line." Daniel Holt called back 11 minutes later. He had the voice of a man who had spent years in rooms where saying the wrong thing had consequences measured unhurried with the specific economy of someone who had learned that most sentences could lose 3 words without losing any meaning. "Mr. Carter," he said, "your son's people reached out this morning. I accepted the engagement." "I know," I said. "What did they ask for?" "Full background workup on you. Financial history, daily movements, social contacts, any evidence of," a brief pause, "cognitive decline." The phrase landed in my chest like something cold and heavy. Cognitive decline. They were already building the language for it, already rehearsing the vocabulary they would need when they stood in front of a judge and argued that Richard James Carter could no longer be trusted to manage his own affairs. "They used those words?" I asked. "Gloria Sterling did," Daniel said. "She made the initial contact. She was very specific about what she wanted documented." Another pause. "She has done this before, Mr. Carter. The way she framed the request, the terminology she used, the specific types of documentation she asked for it, was not the first time she has had this conversation with an investigator." I filed that away and kept my voice level. "What else?" "They are moving on 2 tracks simultaneously," Daniel said. "The private investigator engagement is one. The other—" I heard the sound of papers shifting. Gloria Sterling met with an attorney named Paulson at a firm on Park Avenue that specializes in guardianship and conservatorship proceedings. That meeting happened 4 days ago. Yesterday, she made a separate inquiry to a private psychiatric practice on the Upper East Side. My hand tightened around the phone until I could feel my pulse in my palm. Under New York Mental Hygiene Law Article 81, a person could petition the court to appoint a guardian over another individual's personal and financial affairs if they could demonstrate that the individual was unable to manage their own life adequately. It was a legitimate legal protection designed to shield vulnerable people from exploitation. And like most legitimate legal protections, it could be turned inside out by someone who knew how to use it as a weapon. To file a credible Article 81 petition, Gloria needed 2 things: a legal argument and a medical one. The attorney on Park Avenue was building the legal argument. The psychiatric practice on the Upper East Side was going to supply the medical one. They are going to fabricate a psychiatric evaluation, I said. That would be my read, Daniel said. The timing is tight. They want this done before your annual board meeting. I stood up from my desk and walked to the window. Manhattan spread out below me in its usual magnificent indifference, 10,000 lives moving in 10,000 directions, none of them aware that somewhere in this building, a man was being quietly erased by the people who were supposed to love him. Daniel, I said, I need everything. Every meeting Gloria takes, every document she requests, every communication between her and that psychiatric practice. I need it documented, time-stamped, and legally obtained. Understood, he said. There is one more thing. The sound of a file opening. I pulled security footage from the parking structure where Gloria and Vanessa met 2 days ago. They were in Vanessa's car for 40 minutes. I have audio. Send it, I said. The file came through while I was still standing at the window. I put my earpiece in and pressed play. Vanessa's voice came through first, crisp and precise. The doctor needs to be someone who cannot be easily discredited, someone with credentials that hold up in court. And then Gloria with the smooth, practiced confidence of a woman who had navigated this terrain before. Leave the doctor to me. I know exactly the kind of man we need. The kind who understands that discretion has a price, and that price is worth paying when the outcome is worth having. A sound followed both of them laughing. Light, easy, unconcerned. My throat burned. Not with tears, with something that had no clean name, a compound emotion made of fury and sorrow, and the particular devastation of hearing people you fed at your table discuss your destruction with the casual comfort of a grocery list. I pulled the earpiece out. Get Claire Donovan, I said to Marcus, who had stayed on the secondary line throughout. Tell her I need her in my office first thing tomorrow, and tell her to bring everything she has on Article 81 challenges. Marcus said, On it. I looked out at the city for a long moment, the audio still echoing in my ears. Then I said, And Marcus, get me everything Daniel has on Gloria Sterling's past, not just the last year. Everything. Claire Donovan arrived at 7:45 in the morning, which told me everything I needed to know about how seriously she had taken Marcus's message the night before. She did not knock. She opened the door, walked to the conference table on the far side of my office, set her laptop and 2 accordion files down with the brisk efficiency of a woman who had already decided how this meeting was going to run, and looked at me across the room. Sit down, Richard, she said. This is going to take a while. In 22 years of working together, Claire Donovan had called me Richard exactly 4 times. Each of those 4 times what followed had been serious enough to justify the informality. I sat down. She opened the first accordion file and spread its contents across the conference table in a sequence that was clearly not random, each document placed with the deliberate logic of someone who had been organizing this presentation in her head since before sunrise. Sterling Creative, LLC, she began. I have been aware of this entity for approximately 6 weeks. I flagged it during a routine review of Nexus Capital's vendor payment logs and began building a file quietly for the same reason Marcus did. I wanted substance before I brought it to you. She looked up briefly. I should have told you sooner. That is on me. It is on all of us, I said. Keep going. She nodded and returned to the documents. Sterling Creative has received $264,000 from Nexus Capital over 14 months. The payments are categorized as brand consulting fees. There is no consulting work product on file anywhere in our system. No reports, no deliverables, no meeting records. The money goes in and does not produce anything except more invoices. Where does it go after it arrives? I asked. Claire slid a document across the table, a wire transfer summary flagged in 3 places with yellow sticky notes. Approximately 40% is retained in the Sterling Creative operating account. The remaining 60% is moved within 72 hours of receipt to a personal account held jointly by Vanessa Sterling Carter and Gloria Sterling. She tapped the document. That joint account has been used to fund personal expenditures, travel retail, what appears to be a down payment on a property in Florida that neither Ethan nor Vanessa has disclosed in any financial statement connected to Carter Global. The Florida property was new information. I filed it without reacting. The structure of what they are doing, Claire continued, her voice carrying the flat precision of someone delivering a medical diagnosis, violates the Bank Secrecy Act, which requires financial institutions to report transactions that appear designed to conceal the origin of funds. It also constitutes tax evasion under Internal Revenue Code. Section 7201, willful failure to report income. Both are federal offenses. She paused. I contacted the IRS Criminal Investigation Division 8 days ago, quietly through proper channels. They are aware of the situation and have opened a preliminary inquiry. You opened a federal inquiry without telling me, I said. I opened a preliminary inquiry, Claire said without apology, which I was legally entitled and as an officer of the court, arguably obligated to do when I had documented evidence of ongoing financial crimes involving company assets. An attorney who sits on evidence of active fraud and takes no action assumes personal liability. I was not willing to assume that liability, and I was not willing to put you in a position where you could be accused of having known and done nothing. I did not tell you because I did not want your response to be influenced by knowing federal eyes were on the situation. She met my gaze directly. Was I wrong? I thought about it for exactly 2 seconds. No, I said. She nodded, accepting this, and moved to the second accordion file. The IRS inquiry is the good news, she said. The difficulty is timing. A federal tax investigation moves slowly. We are talking about a process that could take 12 to 18 months before charges are filed, if they are filed at all. She opened the second file. If we want a faster, harder outcome, we need wire fraud. Federal wire fraud under Title 18, Section 1343, the use of electronic communications to execute a fraudulent financial scheme. The penalties are significantly more severe. The evidentiary standard is well established, and federal prosecutors move considerably faster on wire cases than on tax cases, which is why we need one more transaction, I said. A large one, Claire confirmed. Documented from authorization to receipt with a clear paper trail connecting Ethan's approval to the transfer into Sterling Creative. Once we have that, she closed the second file with a clean, decisive motion. We hand everything to the U.S. Attorney's Office and let them finish it. Marcus, who had been sitting at the far end of the table reviewing his own copy of the documents, looked up. The Brooklyn penalty clause is going to create pressure on Ethan's budget in the next 2 weeks, he said. He is going to need to move money. Sterling Creative is the obvious mechanism. Then we wait for the pressure to build, I said, and we let him make the transfer himself. Claire gathered her documents back into the accordion files, with the same organized efficiency she had displayed laying them out. She was halfway to her feet when she stopped. There is one more thing, she said. Her voice had changed, still professional, still controlled, but carrying a different weight underneath. The weight of something she had been deciding how to say. The conservatorship petition, she said. Daniel's surveillance indicates Gloria's attorney filed preliminary paperwork with the court this morning. They are not waiting, Richard. She looked at me steadily. We have days, not weeks, before this becomes a public court proceeding. The room felt smaller suddenly, not because anything had changed physically, but because the walls of the available timeline had just contracted around me with a sharp, unmistakable finality. "How do we respond?" I asked. Claire picked up her files, settled them under her arm, and looked at me with the expression of a woman who had already been working on the answer to that question since before she walked through the door. "We do not respond," she said. "We preempt. Tonight." Before I reveal what Daniel uncovered next, something that made my blood run cold in a way nothing had before, I need to know you are still with me. Drop the number 9 in the comments right now. Just that. 9. It tells me you are here, and honestly, after everything I am about to share, I do not want to go through this next part alone. A reminder, this story contains fictional elements woven in for dramatic and reflective purposes. If this kind of content is not for you, this is a perfectly good moment to step away, no judgment, and thank you for making it this far. Before I tell you what was on that recording, what I heard that night that changed everything, drop the number 9 in the comments right now. Just the number 9. That tells me you are still here, and trust me, you are going to want to stay for what comes next. A gentle reminder, portions of this story include fictional elements crafted for storytelling and reflection. If that is not something you wish to continue with, this is a comfortable place to step away, no hard feelings at all. Harold Brennan arrived at 8:17 in the evening, carrying a battered leather briefcase that I recognized from approximately 3 decades of watching him carry it into rooms where difficult things were about to be decided. He was a tall man, slightly stooped now in the way of tall men who had spent 31 years leaning over judicial benches with white hair and the kind of face that had accumulated its lines honestly, each one earned through a specific argument, a specific verdict, a specific night spent sitting with a hard truth that did not get easier by morning. He looked around. My office looked at Claire, seated at the conference table, with her files already open, looked at me and said, "You could have called me sooner, Richard." "I know," I said. "Sit down, Harold," Claire said, with the easy authority of a woman who had worked alongside Harold Brennan on 3 previous matters and knew exactly how he preferred to operate. "We have a lot of ground to cover." Harold opened his briefcase and removed a yellow legal pad that was already covered in handwriting. He had been working on this before he arrived. Of course he had. "The Article 81 petition," he said, uncapping his pen. "Tell me exactly what Daniel's surveillance confirmed." Claire walked him through it. The Park Avenue attorney, the psychiatric practice on the Upper East Side, the preliminary paperwork filed that morning. Harold listened without interrupting, which was how he had always listened, his pen moving occasionally across the legal pad in the shorthand he had developed during his years on the bench and never bothered to translate for anyone else. When Claire finished, Harold tapped his pen against the pad 3 times, a habit I had watched him develop sometime in the mid-90s, and which meant he had reached a conclusion he was confident in. "The petition is weak," he said. "Procedurally, it requires a medical affidavit from a licensed evaluator before a judge will schedule a hearing. If their evaluator is the psychiatric practice Daniel identified, we can challenge the independence of that evaluation on the grounds of undisclosed financial relationships, which, given what Claire has found on Sterling Creative, we can document." He looked at me directly. "But challenging the petition after it is filed means we are playing defense in someone else's courtroom. I do not like that position." "Neither do I said. "Then we do not let it get that far." Harold turned to a fresh page on his legal pad. "New York Social Services Law Section 473 covers financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Combined with what Claire has documented, the fraudulent vendor payments, the undisclosed transfers to the Gloria and Vanessa joint account, we have grounds to file a preemptive action for trust fraud and financial elder abuse in New York Supreme Court. He wrote as he spoke, the pen moving with the speed of a man whose thoughts had always moved faster than most people were comfortable following. We file tonight, before they can establish any procedural advantage with the Article 81 petition. Can we have it ready in time? Claire asked. I have had the draft prepared since this afternoon, Harold said without looking up from his legal pad. Claire stared at him for a moment, then turned to me with an expression that said very clearly that she approved of Harold Brennan. There is a second piece, I said. Harold looked up. The trust structure, I said. I want to establish a new, irrevocable trust tonight and transfer my controlling interest in Carter Global into it. If Ethan's legal team tries to argue that my assets should be subject to guardian oversight, I want those assets already inside a structure that a guardian cannot touch. Harold nodded slowly. An irrevocable trust removes the assets from your personal estate entirely, he said. Once established, you cannot modify it, and neither can a court-appointed guardian because the assets no longer legally belong to you as an individual, they belong to the trust. Carter Global is privately held, which means the transfer can be executed tonight without SEC disclosure requirements or public filing obligations. He paused. Who are the beneficiaries? The Carter Foundation, I said, and one individual. I told him about Tommy Reyes. I described what I had watched Tommy do over 9 months. The flagged line items, the Brooklyn analysis, the way he straightened the chair behind him when he left a room as though he understood that the spaces other people worked in deserved to be returned to them undisturbed. Harold listened to all of it. Then he said, "You have thought about this for a long time." 2 years, I said. He nodded once, accepting this, and looked at Claire. Draft the trust instrument. I will finalize the court filing. He checked his watch. We have until midnight to get both documents executed and filed. What followed was 3 hours and 41 minutes of work that I will not detail exhaustively, because the details were largely technical, and the emotional substance of those hours was not in the paperwork. It was in the occasional moments between documents, Harold refilling his coffee without being asked, Claire correcting a clause and reading the revision aloud for confirmation, the three of us moving around each other in the specific wordless rhythm of people who have weathered difficult things together and know how to share a room under pressure. At 11:59, Claire looked up from her laptop. Filed, she said. Harold exhaled a long, slow breath that carried the weight of the evening out of the room with it. He capped his pen, closed his legal pad, and looked at me across the conference table with the expression of a man who had just done something he was glad to have been asked to do. It is done, he said. The trust is established. The filing is in. Ethan Carter is no longer your legal heir, and Gloria Sterling's petition has just run into a wall she did not see coming. I looked at the clock on the wall. Midnight, exactly. Thank you, Harold, I said. He waved a hand, dismissing the gratitude with the ease of a man who had never needed it. 38 years, he said. You would have done the same. He picked up his briefcase, shook Claire's hand, and walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame and looked back at me with the particular expression he had worn every time across 3 decades of friendship, that he wanted to say something important, without making it sound important. Get some sleep, Richard, he said. Tomorrow you will have to watch it play out, and not intervene. That is always the hardest part. I slept 4 hours. It was enough. I have never needed more than 4 hours when something important was waiting on the other side of the night. And what was waiting on the other side of this particular night was the specific, clarifying pleasure of watching people who believed they were hunting discover that they had been the prey all along. I was at my desk by 6. Marcus had sent overnight updates, 3 of them time-stamped between midnight and 5 in the morning. Because Marcus Webb did not sleep during active operations, any more than I did. I read them in order, drinking coffee that was actually hot for once, and by the time I finished the third one, I was entirely certain that the next 24 hours were going to go exactly as I needed them to go. The first update confirmed that Gloria Sterling had received a call from her Park Avenue attorney at 7:14 the previous evening, approximately 1 hour before Harold had filed our preemptive action with the court. The attorney had been confident, upbeat even. He had told Gloria that the preliminary paperwork was in and that the Article 81 petition was on track. He did not yet know what Harold had filed. The second update was from Daniel. Vanessa had made a phone call at 9:40 the previous evening to a number registered to a legal services firm in Midtown. The call lasted 11 minutes. Based on the content Daniel had captured, Vanessa was confirming an appointment for the following morning, an appointment to begin the process of transferring certain marital assets into her sole name. I set the coffee down. This was the move I had been waiting for. Not because the asset transfer itself was the end of anything, but because of who Vanessa believed she was calling. 6 weeks ago, Claire had identified a private attorney, a meticulous, discreet practitioner named Warren Cole, who operated a small firm out of a Midtown office and specialized in high-net-worth asset structuring. Claire had approached Warren Cole through a third-party intermediary, explained the situation in broad terms, and retained him on Carter Global's behalf, under a confidentiality arrangement that kept the connection invisible to anyone who did not already know to look for it. Then Claire had ensured through a carefully routed referral one that Daniel Holt had made possible by mapping Gloria's referral network over the preceding weeks, that Warren Cole's name found its way to Vanessa as a recommendation from within her own trusted circle. Gloria, whose habit of working through a small and consistent set of professional contacts Daniel had documented thoroughly, had done exactly what Daniel predicted she would do. She had vouched for a lawyer she believed she controlled. Gloria had introduced Vanessa to her own trap. She had built it herself, and neither of them had any idea. At 10:15 that morning, according to Warren Cole's subsequent report, Vanessa Sterling Carter walked into his office on the 43rd floor of a building on 6th Avenue and sat down across from a man she believed was working entirely in her interest. I was not in the room. I heard all of it later on a call Warren made to Claire with me on the parallel line. He called at 11:50. "She is thorough," he said. "She came with documentation, account statements, property valuations, a list of assets she wants moved into sole ownership. She talked for 40 minutes without being asked many questions." "What did she say about the source of the assets?" Claire asked. "She had me on a parallel line listening." "She said they were marital assets accumulated through her husband's career earnings," Warren said. "She did not mention Carter Global by name. She did not mention Sterling Creative by name. But the account figures she cited are consistent with what you showed me. The numbers match the outflows from your records almost exactly." "Did she ask about the structure of the transfer documents?" Claire asked. "She asked if they were standard," Warren said. "I told her they were. They were not standard." Every document Warren Cole had prepared for Vanessa's signature contained language drafted by Claire, language that on its face read as routine asset transfer, boilerplate, but which included a clause embedded in the definitions section on page 4 that designated the transfers as voidable under the New York Uniform Voidable Transactions Act, in the event that the transferring party was subsequently found to have executed the transfers while engaged in fraudulent financial activity. In plain language, the moment a court found that the money Vanessa was moving had been obtained through fraud, which our filing with the U.S. Attorney's Office would establish, every transfer she signed for today could be unwound, completely, as though it had never happened. Vanessa signed 7 documents. Ethan, who came in at the end of the appointment to countersign, signed 4 more. He had brought no independent counsel. He never did. Warren Cole called Claire again at 1:30. "It is done," he said. They were very pleased with how smoothly it went. I imagine they were, Claire said. She ended the call and looked across the conference table at me. Something moved across her face, not quite satisfaction, not quite sorrow, but the specific expression of a person who has just watched an irreversible door close and is making sure they remember what it looked like. He signed everything, she said. I know, I said. Marcus appeared in the doorway, his phone in his hand, his expression carrying the controlled urgency that meant new information had arrived, and it was not small. The wire just went through, he said. Ethan approved a transfer of $2.3 million from Nexus Capital to Sterling Creative 11 minutes ago. The wire. The federal wire fraud evidence I had been building toward for 3 weeks, complete, documented, and unambiguous. I looked at Marcus. I looked at Claire. Call the U.S. Attorney's office, I said. Tell them we are ready. Claire came back to my office at 4 in the afternoon carrying a single manila envelope. Not an accordion file. Not a laptop. Just one envelope, slim and slightly worn at the corners, sealed with a metal clasp that had been opened and reclosed enough times to leave small indentations in the paper. She set it on the desk in front of me and sat down across from me without saying anything immediately, which was unusual enough for Claire Donovan, that I looked at the envelope for a moment before I looked at her. How old is that? I asked. 7 years and 4 months, she said. I reached for it. The contents were straightforward. A prenuptial agreement, 41 pages executed in the month before Ethan and Vanessa's wedding. Standard header, standard party designations. The familiar architecture of a document designed to define the financial boundaries of a marriage before the marriage began. I had reviewed the original draft 7 years ago, suggested 2 modifications, and signed off on it without making a significant issue of it, because I had not wanted to make Ethan feel that I doubted his judgment in choosing a partner. What I had wanted was a contingency. I turned to page 31 where Claire had placed a small paperclip. The clause was embedded in a subsection titled Additional Protective Provisions, between a paragraph about intellectual property and a paragraph about business interest valuations. It was 4 sentences long. In language that read on the surface as boilerplate protective language of the kind found in most sophisticated prenuptial agreements, it stated that in the event either party or a member of either party's immediate family was found to have engaged in financial misconduct directed at Carter Global Holdings or any of its subsidiary entities, all marital assets accumulated during the marriage, from sources connected to Carter, global compensation distributions, bonuses, expense accounts, and any assets purchased using funds derived from the foregoing would be subject to immediate recovery by Carter Global Holdings upon application to the court. In plain language, if Vanessa's family stole from my company, everything she had accumulated from my company's money went back. She had signed it on page 41 in the quick, slightly impatient signature of a woman who had reviewed the document in the car on the way to the notary and had not made it past page 12. She never read past the standard sections, Claire said. No, I said. She did not. I set the document down on the desk. My chest felt strange, not tight, not burning, just strange the way a room feels strange when something that has been present in it for a long time has been quietly removed. I thought about Ethan on his wedding day, standing at the front of a room full of people looking toward the door. I had stood beside him for 20 minutes while they waited for the processional to begin. He had been nervous in the specific boyish way that even grown men cannot entirely suppress. On the day they get married, his hands moving in and out of his jacket pockets, his eyes going to the door every 30 seconds. I had put my hand on his shoulder and told him she was coming. Does Ethan know? I asked. About this clause? Claire shook her head. He never requested a copy of the full executed agreement after the wedding. I offered to send one to his personal attorney at the time. His attorney declined, said Ethan had reviewed it and was satisfied. A pause. He reviewed the summary his attorney prepared, 12 pages. The summary did not include the additional protective provisions subsection. I pressed the tips of my fingers together and looked at the wall behind Claire's head for a moment. Not because I needed to think about what the clause meant legally, but because I needed a second to decide how I felt about the fact that I had put it there. 7 years ago, I had sat across from Claire in this same office and asked her to build a lock into a document that I hoped I would never need to use. I had done it because I was a man who had spent 40 years in business and understood that hope was not a strategy. I had done it quietly, without telling Ethan, because telling him would have required a conversation. I did not want to have a conversation that said explicitly that I was not certain his wife was marrying him for the right reasons. I had been certain. I had simply been prepared. 7 years, I said, and she never once read what she signed. Claire did not answer that. There was nothing useful to say about it, and Claire Donovan had never been a woman who spoke when silence carried the point more cleanly. My phone buzzed on the desk. Marcus. I answered and put it on speaker. "The wire transfer is confirmed," Marcus said, his voice carrying the flat, factual energy of a man reading from documentation rather than offering an opinion. $2.3 million initiated by Ethan Carter at 11:04 this morning, received by Sterling Creative, LLC at 11:17. The U.S. Attorney's Office has the complete transfer record, the authorization chain, and the Sterling Creative corporate documentation. A brief pause. They are moving forward. We can expect coordinated action within 72 hours. 72 hours. 3 days before the annual board meeting. I looked at the prenuptial agreement on the desk. I looked at the wire transfer confirmation Marcus had just described. I thought about Warren Cole's office and Ethan's signature on 4 documents that would dissolve on contact with the court order that was now, as of this moment, inevitable. "Marcus," I said, "let Ethan enjoy the next 3 days." A beat. "Sir, he is going to spend them believing he has won," I said. "Let him have that. He will not have much else." I ended the call. Claire picked up the manila envelope, reclosed the metal clasp, and stood. She paused at the edge of the desk, holding the envelope with both hands, and looked at me with the expression she wore when she wanted to acknowledge something, without making it larger than it needed to be. "You built this 7 years ago," she said. "Before any of this happened. Before you had any reason to think you would need it." "I had every reason," I said. "I just did not want to be right." She nodded once and walked out. I sat with that for the long time after she left. The envelope gone, the prenuptial clause filed in whatever internal system Claire used for documents that had been waiting 7 years to matter. The afternoon light was doing something complicated with the Manhattan skyline outside my window, turning the glass towers amber and copper in the way that only happened in early evening, in early summer, when the city briefly looked like it was made of something warmer than steel and concrete. 3 days. Daniel's file arrived at 6:47 in the evening. I was alone in my office. Marcus had gone home at my insistence. He had been running on 3 hours of sleep for 4 consecutive days, and had started making the small, precise errors that careful men make when their bodies have finally had enough. Claire had left an hour earlier. The cleaning crew had come and gone. The floor was quiet in the specific way that large office buildings get quiet after 7 in the evening, when the last stragglers have cleared out, and the building settles into itself like a person finally exhaling after holding their breath all day. I opened the file on my laptop. The first page was a summary Daniel had written himself, 2 paragraphs, no embellishment. The spare, factual prose of a man who had spent years writing field reports for people who needed information without editorializing. He had headed it with a name and a date. Gerald Whitmore, Morris County, New Jersey, 15 years ago. Gerald Whitmore had been 63 years old when he met Gloria Sterling at a charity auction in Morristown. He was a widower. His wife of 31 years had died of cancer 18 months prior. He owned a small but profitable chain of dry cleaning businesses, 3 locations across Morris County, which he had built over 25 years through the specific combination of modest ambition and relentless consistency that characterizes people who are very good at one thing and content to be so. He was not wealthy by the standards of the circles Gloria moved in. But he was comfortable and he was lonely, and those 2 qualities in combination made him precisely the kind of man Gloria Sterling knew how to find. They dated for 8 months. Gloria was charming, attentive, and patient in the specific way of a person who understands that the most valuable things require time to acquire. Gerald's children, a son in Philadelphia, a daughter in Vermont, met her twice and expressed mild reservations that Gerald dismissed with the cheerful confidence of a man who had decided he was in love and did not want to be argued out of it. 14 months after they met, Gerald suffered a stroke. It was moderate. He recovered most of his mobility and all of his cognition. But the recovery was slow and frightening, and in the weeks immediately following the event, when Gerald was in the rehabilitation facility, and the world felt uncertain and temporary, Gloria sat beside his bed every day and held his hand and told him that she would take care of everything. He believed her. He signed a power of attorney document 4 weeks after the stroke in the rehabilitation facility with Gloria present and a notary she had brought with her. The document was comprehensive. It granted Gloria full authority over Gerald's financial accounts, his business interests, and his personal assets for the duration of his recovery. His recovery, as it turned out, lasted longer than his money. Over the following 11 months, Gloria systematically emptied Gerald's accounts. The dry cleaning businesses were sold below market value to a buyer whose connection to Gloria Daniel had noted could not be definitively established, but warranted further investigation. The proceeds went into an account Gloria controlled. Personal savings retirement funds, a small investment portfolio Gerald had maintained for 30 years, all liquidated, all transferred, all gone. When Gerald's son arrived from Philadelphia for a routine visit and discovered that his father's checking account contained $412, Gloria Sterling had already left New Jersey. Gerald contested the transfers. His attorney filed suit. The case was settled out of court 3 years later, by which point Gerald's legal fees had consumed most of what he had recovered, and the settlement itself was sealed. Gerald Whitmore died in a rental apartment in Dover, New Jersey, 14 months after the settlement. His death certificate listed the cause as cardiac failure. He was 69 years old. His son told the county social worker who processed the estate that his father had not left the apartment in 6 weeks before he died, and had stopped answering the phone in the final month. I read the last paragraph 3 times, not because I had missed anything the first 2 times, but because the mind sometimes needs repetition to fully absorb the weight of what it is being shown. I was looking at a blueprint. Gloria Sterling had done this before, not impulsively, not opportunistically, but methodically, with planning and patience, and the particular cruelty of someone who understood that the loneliest people were also the least defended. She had found Gerald Whitmore in his grief and his comfort and his loneliness, and she had taken everything he had, and she had left, and he had died alone in a rental apartment in New Jersey while she moved on to find the next one. My throat tightened, not with grief this time, not with the complicated sorrow I had felt sitting beside the old man in the courtyard of Meadow Glen, but with something colder and harder and entirely without ambiguity. I picked up my phone and called Harold. He answered on the second ring. "Richard." "She has done this before, Harold," I said. "To another man. His name was Gerald Whitmore. He did not survive it." A long pause on the line. The pause of a man absorbing something and reorganizing himself around it. "How complete is Daniel's documentation?" Harold asked him. "Complete enough," I said. "The court filing from the original suit is public record. The settlement is sealed, but the filing itself documents the transfers. Combined with what we already have on Sterling Creative, it establishes a pattern," Harold said. "Prosecutors love patterns, Richard. Patterns turn a single incident into a character argument." "I know," I said. "What do you want to do?" I stood up from my desk and walked to the window. The city was dark now, lit from within every window, in every tower, a small square of someone else's evening. Somewhere out there, Gloria Sterling was having dinner, or watching television, or making plans entirely unaware that a man named Gerald Whitmore had just become the most important person in her future. "Make sure the warrant covers everything," I said. "Every charge available. I do not want her to walk away from a single one of them." "Consider it done," Harold said. I ended the call. I looked at Gerald Whitmore's name on my laptop screen for a moment longer. Then I closed the file, picked up my phone, and called Marcus. "Prepare the full package for the board meeting," I said. "Everything. Every document, every recording, every transfer record. I want it ready by Friday morning." "It will be ready," Marcus said. I ended the call and looked out at the city. 2 days. The day before the board meeting, Ethan bought a new suit. I know this because Daniel's surveillance flagged a charge on Ethan's personal credit card at 2:17 in the afternoon, a men's clothing store on Madison Avenue, $4,300, which was the kind of purchase a man makes when he believes that tomorrow is going to be the most important day of his professional life, and he wants to look exactly right for it. He was not wrong about the importance of the day. He was wrong about everything else. I was in my office when Marcus forwarded the charge notification, and I read it with the particular feeling that comes at the end of a long operation, not triumph, not relief, but a kind of settled gravity, the weight of something that has been moving for a long time, finally arriving at its destination. Across town in the penthouse on East 72nd Street that belonged to Carter Global Holdings, and not to Ethan Carter, a celebration was already underway. Daniel's audio feed picked it up at 6 in the evening. Gloria had arrived with 2 bottles of Cristal and a reservation confirmation for a 5-star hotel suite she had booked for the following evening, the celebration dinner she had planned for after the board meeting, after what she was entirely certain would be Ethan's coronation as CEO. "To tomorrow," Gloria said, and the sound of crystal against crystal came through the feed with sharp, clean clarity. "To the Carter name," Vanessa said. Ethan laughed the same bright, open laugh I had heard through the frosted glass panels at Maison Laurent 3 weeks ago. It had not changed at all. He was just as comfortable, just as certain, just as entirely unaware of what was waiting for him on the other side of the next 12 hours. "I have been thinking about the office," Vanessa said, her voice dropping into the focused proprietary register she used when she was planning something she had already decided was hers. "The view from Richard's corner is extraordinary. We should keep the desk it photographs well, but everything else goes. New chairs, new shelving, better lighting. Something that says this is a working office, not a museum. Give me a week to settle in," Ethan said, "and you can do whatever you want with it." There was a pause, the sound of paper shifting, the particular dry sound of printed pages being handled. "I have the remarks ready for tomorrow," Ethan said. 2 minutes. Clean. I had someone look it over. A brief pause, then Gloria's voice, lower now, stripped of the celebratory warmth and carrying the business-like undertone that was her natural register when she thought no one outside the room was listening. "Vanessa." Just the name. An instruction disguised as a greeting. I heard Vanessa set her glass down. "Once he has the title locked in," Gloria said carefully, "we move quickly. The asset restructuring Warren handled is already in place," Vanessa said. "Good." Another pause. "And the other matter," Richard. Richard will be handled, Ethan said with the flat, rehearsed confidence of a man repeating something he had said enough times to stop hearing how it sounded. The Article 81 filing is on track. Once I have executive authority and the Article 81 petition is granted, the court assigns a guardian. Medical decisions follow from there. It is procedural. Gloria made a sound of satisfaction. Once he has the title, she said to Vanessa, in a tone that had shed even the pretense of including Ethan in the conversation. We can renegotiate everything, all of it. Vanessa answered quietly. I know, Mother. I stopped the audio feed. I sat for a moment with the earpiece in my hand, looking at nothing in particular, letting the full meaning of Gloria's words arrange itself clearly in my mind. We can renegotiate everything. Not we will enjoy this. Not we have worked hard for this. Renegotiate. The language of a contract review, not a family celebration. The language of a woman who had looked at her daughter's marriage and seen a transaction that had not yet reached its final terms. I put the earpiece down and called Marcus. Everything is confirmed for tomorrow, I asked. Everything, Marcus said. The board packets go out at 7 a.m. Diana has the revised agenda. The federal agents will be in position by 8:30. Claire has the court order authorizing the asset recovery. Harold confirmed the warrant is active. A pause. Daniel will have a live feed running throughout. And Tommy? He does not know yet, Marcus said. I thought you would want to tell him yourself. I looked out the window. The city was settling into its evening configuration, the daytime density thinning slightly as people moved toward home and dinner and the ordinary necessities of ordinary lives. In one of the towers, I could see from my window a light was still on in a corner office. Someone working late, someone with a deadline, someone who had stayed because the work was not finished, and they were the kind of person who did not leave until it was. I thought about Tommy Reyes, who had found the Kings County title dispute in 40 minutes and reported it without being asked, who had flagged 3 line items in a variance report because he thought they might need attention, who straightened the chairs he sat in when he left a room. I will tell him myself, I said. I ended the call with Marcus and stood up from my desk. I walked down the hall to the small office Tommy shared with 2 other junior staff members. Both of his colleagues had gone home. Tommy was at his desk, jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbow, working through a stack of documents with the focused attention of someone who had not noticed that the floor had emptied around him. He looked up when I appeared in the doorway. Mr. Carter, he said, straightening immediately, reaching for his jacket. Leave it, I said. I only have a minute. I wanted to ask you something. He waited, his hands still on the jacket, his eyes steady and attentive. What does this company mean to you? I asked. He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone who did not know the answer, but the quiet of someone deciding how honestly to give it. It means the work matters, he said finally. Not the title, not the floor you sit on. The actual work, whether it is done right, whether it holds up, whether the people depending on it can rely on it. He paused. That is what I think it means. What it should mean. I looked at him for a long moment. Get some sleep tonight, Tommy, I said. Come in early tomorrow. I walked back to my office, sat down, and looked at the city for a long time. One day, the boardroom on the 42nd floor of Carter Global Holdings had floor-to-ceiling windows on 3 sides. On clear mornings, which this was, you could see all the way to the Hudson from the north wall, and all the way to Brooklyn from the east. I had sat in that room for 40 years of board meetings, quarterly reviews, emergency sessions, the occasional gathering that started as a routine update and ended as a crisis management exercise. I knew every sightline, every acoustical corner, every way the morning light moved across the polished oak table as the hours progressed. I arrived at 7:45 and took my seat at the head of the table. I had not sat at the head of that table in 8 months. The speech Ethan had prepared was for this seat. He had written it for this room, this table, this view. He did not know that I had written mine first 40 years ago, on a frozen site in Lower Manhattan, in the language of poured concrete and borrowed money, and the decision made once and never revisited, to build something that would last. I had stepped back from the daily chair, let Ethan run the operational meetings, told myself it was succession planning and not abdication. This morning I pulled the chair out, sat down, and felt the particular rightness of a man returning to a place that had always been his. The board members arrived between 8 and 8:37 of them, the people I had spent decades building relationships with, some of whom had been with me since the early years when Carter Global was 2 commercial properties and a borrowed conference room in a building we did not own. They greeted me with varying degrees of warmth and carefully managed surprise. Several of them had heard the rumors Marcus had allowed to circulate, that I was not well, that I was struggling, that the company needed new direction. I shook each hand firmly and let their reassessment happen in real time. Ethan arrived at 8:47. He came through the boardroom doors with Vanessa on his arm and Gloria 2 steps behind, and for a moment, just a moment, the 3 of them looked exactly like what they believed themselves to be. Ethan had grown up in the company the way some children grow up in churches, present for all the rituals, familiar with all the language, and entirely untouched by the original act of faith that had built the walls around them. He had never seen me pour concrete on a frozen site in February of 1986, with 12 investors and a borrowed excavator, and nothing between me and failure except the decision not to accept it. He had never seen the version of me that existed before the money, before the skyline, before the name on the building meant anything to anyone. He had only ever seen the result. And somewhere along the way, he had made the mistake that sons sometimes make. He had looked at what his father had built and concluded that he deserved it simply by proximity. He saw me at the head of the table and stopped walking. In that half second, I watched something cross his face that I had not expected to see there. Not calculation, not recovery, but something closer to recognition. As though he were seeing for the first time not the man who had written his tuition checks and signed his expense approvals and made the reservations at Maison Laurent, but the man who had built the room he was standing in. It lasted perhaps 2 seconds. Then the recovery came smooth and practiced, and he crossed toward me with his hand extended. Ethan was wearing the new suit. It fit him well. He had his father's shoulders, which I had always considered one of the kinder things genetics had done for him. "Dad," he said warmly, "I did not know you were planning to attend in person. I thought you might dial in." "I felt well enough to come," I said, and shook his hand. His grip was slightly too firm, the grip of a man compensating for something. Vanessa smiled at me with her eyes doing none of the work. Gloria nodded the nod of a woman who has decided that the unexpected variable in front of her is manageable and will not materially affect the outcome. They took their seats, Ethan at the far end of the table, Vanessa and Gloria in the observer chairs along the south wall. At 9 o'clock, Diana Marsh stepped to the front of the room. Diana was 38 years old and had run investor relations for Carter Global for 6 years. She had the specific quality of a person who could deliver unwelcome information in a tone so professionally measured that the recipient did not fully register what had been said until she had already moved on to the next point. I had hired her for exactly that quality. Today it was going to be useful in a way she had been briefed on, but that most of the room had not. "Good morning," she said. "Thank you all for being here. Before we begin, I want to note a change to today's agenda." She looked at the room with the calm, unhurried attention of someone announcing a schedule adjustment rather than detonating a device. "At the request of the board's executive committee, this session..." We'll open with the presentation of findings from a special internal audit conducted over the past 3 weeks. The succession announcement will follow that presentation. The room shifted. Not loudly, these were people who had spent careers learning to receive unexpected information without visible reaction. But I felt it, the subtle adjustment of weight and attention, the way the air in the room changed when everyone in it simultaneously realized that something different was happening. Ethan's face did not move. He was very good at that. But his right hand, which had been resting flat on the table in front of him, curled inward slowly, almost imperceptibly, until his knuckles were white against the polished oak. The audit findings will be presented by Marcus Webb, Chief Financial Officer, Diana said, followed by additional materials from General Counsel Claire Donovan. She stepped back. Marcus stood. He had prepared the presentation, the way Marcus prepared everything, without unnecessary drama, without rhetorical embellishment, with the pure factual weight of a man who had spent 20 years ensuring that the numbers told the truth, even when the people behind them preferred that they did not. He opened with the sterling creative transaction record. He walked the board through each payment, each authorization, each wire transfer, the complete ledger of 26 months of systematic theft, presented in clear, sequential, undeniable order. I watched the board members as Marcus spoke. I watched them read the documents in the packets Diana had distributed. I watched their faces do the specific thing that faces do when people who are intelligent and experienced and professionally trained to process complex information encounter something that is worse than they had prepared for. And then I watched Ethan. He did not look at the documents. He did not look at Marcus. He looked at me. Across the length of the polished oak table, across 40 years, and one new suit, and everything that had been built and broken between us, my son looked at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. Not anger, not defiance, recognition. He knew. In the specific cellular way that a person knows when the ground has shifted beneath them, and there is nothing left to stand on, he knew exactly what was happening and exactly how long it had been coming. I held his gaze and did not look away. Then I reached forward, picked up the remote control sitting at the center of the table, and said to the room quietly and without any drama at all, "There is one more thing the board should hear. Before I tell you what happened inside that boardroom, before I show you exactly how everything came apart for all three of them at once, type the word 'ready' in the comments. Because what comes next is the moment I had been building toward for 24 days, and I want you to be prepared for it." A quick note before we continue: this story includes fictional elements added to bring the narrative to life. Any details that feel familiar are coincidental, but the truth at the center of it is one I stand behind completely. I pressed play. The audio filled the boardroom through the ceiling speakers, Gloria's voice first clear and unhurried, carrying the comfortable authority of a woman who believed she was speaking in private. Then Vanessa's. Then Ethan's. The recording from the parking structure, 40 minutes of conversation, captured without their knowledge on the night they had sat in Vanessa's car and planned the specific mechanics of my erasure. The board members listened without moving. I watched them the way I had always watched rooms, tracking the small physical tells that reveal what people are actually thinking beneath whatever expression they have chosen to present. The chairman, a man named Arthur Fielding, who had known me for 31 years and had the particular stillness of someone who had presided over enough catastrophic situations to have developed real equanimity in the face of them, listened with his hands flat on the table and his eyes on the speaker in the ceiling. When the recording ended, the room was very quiet. Claire stepped forward from the doorway where she had been standing since Marcus finished his presentation. She was carrying a document that she placed at the center of the table, a court order issued that morning, authorizing the immediate recovery of all assets transferred under the documents Ethan and Vanessa had signed in Warren Cole's office. "The transfers executed 3 days ago," Claire said, "have been voided by order of the New York Supreme Court under the Uniform Voidable Transactions Act. The penthouse at East 72nd Street reverts to Carter Global Holdings effective immediately. All financial accounts funded through Sterling Creative LLC are frozen pending federal review." Vanessa made a sound, short, involuntary, the sound a person makes when something hits them before they have time to prepare for it. She pressed her hand to her mouth, her eyes going to Ethan, then to Gloria, then to the court order on the table. The boardroom doors opened. Diana stepped inside, her expression carrying a message she delivered without words by holding the door open behind her. 2 men in dark suits waited in the hallway beyond IRS Criminal Investigation. Special agents, their credentials displayed on lanyards. They did not enter the boardroom. They did not need to. The lead agent caught Gloria Sterling's eye through the open door and said simply and without theater, "Ms. Sterling, would you come with us, please?" It was not a question. Gloria saw them before anyone else fully registered what was happening. She stood. She straightened her jacket. She looked at Vanessa once, a look that contained everything and offered nothing, and walked out of the boardroom under her own power, the agents falling into position on either side of her in the hallway. The door closed. Vanessa watched her mother leave. Then something happened in Vanessa Sterling Carter's face that I had never seen there before, not in 7 years of family dinners, not in 7 years of carefully managed warmth and strategic affection. The calculation left her eyes entirely. What remained was something raw and more human, not remorse, but a recognition of finality, the specific expression of a person who has just watched the last door close and understood for the first time that there is nothing on the other side of it. She stood up from her chair. The room watched her. No one spoke. She reached into the collar of her dress and unclasped the chain that held her engagement ring and wedding band. She had worn them on a necklace since the morning I realized, as though she had known she might need to remove them quickly. She held them in her closed fist for a moment. Then she walked to the boardroom table, opened her hand, and set them down in front of Ethan, with a small, definitive sound of metal on wood. "I never loved you," she said. Her voice was quiet and entirely steady, the voice of someone delivering a fact rather than an accusation. "I loved what you were supposed to become. I am sorry that it was not enough to be worth the honesty." Ethan stared at the rings on the table. His face had gone the color of the white linen board packets stacked at the end of the table. His mouth opened and then closed. His hands, which had been gripping the arms of his chair since Gloria walked out, released their hold, and I watched his shoulders drop, not with relief, but with the specific physical collapse of a man whose body has decided to stop pretending. He did not look at Vanessa as she walked out. He looked at the rings. Then he looked at me. I had prepared in the abstract for this moment, for the moment when my son would look at me across the wreckage of everything he had tried to build on foundations that were never his, and ask me without words what came next. What I had not prepared for was how young he would look, not young in the way of innocence. Young in the way of someone who has finally run out of performance and is left with only himself, uncertain and diminished and stripped of every layer he had spent years accumulating. I held his gaze. "Ethan," I said quietly, "it is over." He nodded, a single small movement barely perceptible, and then he put his face in his hands, and the sound that came out of him was not a word and not a sob, but something in between, the sound of a man who has held something together for a very long time, finally letting it fall. 24 days of moving. 11 weeks of watching before that. Every single one of them necessary. Before I tell you how it all came to an end on that Thursday morning, drop Thursday in the comments. Let me know you made it this far. You deserve to see how this ends. Please note, this story includes fictional elements constructed for storytelling purposes. Certain names, details, and circumstances have been shaped for clarity and impact. If you prefer not to continue, this is a graceful moment to step away. For everyone staying, thank you. Let's finish this together. The boardroom had gone very still. Ethan had not moved from his chair. He was sitting with his face still lowered, his hands clasped on the table in front of him, and the rings Vanessa had left were still sitting 6 inches from his right hand, where she had placed them. He had not touched them. I did not think he would. The board members were watching me. Arthur Fielding at my left had the expression of a man who had processed everything he had witnessed in the past hour, and was now waiting with the patience of someone who had learned that the most important moments in a room were almost always the ones that came after the obvious ones. I stood up. "There is one final piece of business," I said. I looked at Diana, who was standing near the door. She nodded once, a small, precise movement, and stepped into the hallway. I heard her voice low and brief, and then the sound of footsteps approaching. Tommy Reyes appeared in the doorway. He was wearing his regular work clothes, not a suit, not anything that suggested he had been told this morning was different from any other morning, because he had not been told. He had his laptop bag over one shoulder and a folder under his arm, which meant Diana had told him only that he was needed in the boardroom, and he had grabbed whatever he was working on because that was the kind of person he was. He did not come empty-handed to a room. He stepped inside and looked at the assembled board members, at Marcus standing along the wall, at Ethan sitting at the far end of the table, with his face turned away, at me standing at the head of the table in the charcoal suit he had probably never seen me wear. His expression did not perform surprise. It simply held open, attentive, waiting for information. "Close the door, Tommy," I said. He reached back and closed it. 9 months ago," I said, addressing both Tommy and the board simultaneously, "I asked Marcus Webb to route a research assignment to a junior staff member without identifying who had originated the request. The assignment was a commercial property analysis, a building in Brooklyn, with a title dispute I knew about, and the assignee would not. I wanted to see how the work was done, not whether it was done. How?" I looked at Tommy. "You found the dispute on the 2nd day. You spent the 3rd day verifying it. You submitted a 12-page report with the Kings County docket attached and 3 flagged line items you thought needed attention. Nobody asked you for any of that. You did it because it was the right way to do the work." Tommy's jaw tightened slightly, the jaw of a person absorbing something that is landing differently than expected and is trying to keep his face from showing how differently. "I have been watching you for 9 months, I said. "Before that, I watched you for a year as a scholarship recipient from the Carter Foundation. 2 years total. I have watched you work late without being asked, and leave rooms the way you found them, and tell me things I did not want to hear because they were true, and you thought I should know them." I reached into the folder in front of me and removed a single document, the board resolution drafted by Claire and approved by the executive committee the previous evening. I slid it to the center of the table. "I am recommending to this board," I said, "that Thomas Reyes be appointed president of Carter Global Holdings, effective immediately, with full operational authority and a compensation structure commensurate with the role." The silence that followed was different from the silences that had preceded it. This one had warmth in it. Arthur Fielding picked up the resolution. He read it, passed it to the director on his left, and looked at me. "Do you want to say anything further before we vote, Richard?" "No," I said. "The work speaks for itself." Arthur looked at the board. "All in favor?" 7 hands went up. No hesitation, not one. Tommy had not moved since I started speaking. He was standing near the door with his laptop bag still on his shoulder and the folder still under his arm, and his eyes were bright in the specific way that eyes get bright when a person is working very hard to maintain composure and is winning the effort, but only just. "Sir," he said. His voice came out slightly unsteady, not broken, just human. "I do not know what to say." "Then do not say anything yet," I said. "Come here." He crossed the room. I extended my hand, and he took it, and I held it for a moment longer than a standard handshake, not dramatically, just long enough for the weight of it to register between us. "You earned this," I said, "every single day. Not because of what you are going to do, because of what you have already done." His throat moved. His grip on my hand tightened once briefly before he released it. "Go meet your board," I said. He turned toward the table. Marcus began introducing him to the directors, and the room shifted into the specific energy of a beginning. People leaning forward, extending hands, the low professional warmth of a group of serious people deciding to take someone seriously. I looked at the far end of the table. Ethan had lifted his head. He was watching Tommy move around the room, watching the board members shake his hand, watching the thing that had been built for him over 35 years be placed in the hands of a 28-year-old who had earned it in 2. He did not look angry. He did not look devastated in the theatrical way I had expected. He looked tired, profoundly, completely tired, the exhaustion of a man who has spent years maintaining a version of himself that was never quite true, and has finally, at enormous cost, been released from the effort. He stood up from the chair, straightened his jacket, with the automatic reflex of someone who has dressed carefully for an occasion that is now over, and walked toward the door. He did not look at me as he passed, but at the doorway he stopped. He stood there for a moment, with his back to the room, one hand on the doorframe. He did not turn around. When he spoke, his voice was very quiet, quiet enough that only I, standing nearest to him, could hear it clearly. "I am sorry, Dad," he said. Then he walked out. The room emptied gradually. The board members filed out in the quiet, purposeful way of people who had witnessed something significant and were processing it privately, saving their reactions for conversations that would happen in hallways and cars and offices later in the day. Arthur Fielding paused beside me on his way out and placed one hand briefly on my shoulder. No words, just the weight of a hand from a man who understood that some moments did not require commentary. And then he too was gone. Marcus left last among the staff, pausing at the door, with the particular expression he wore when he wanted to say something, and had decided after consideration that the timing was not right. He looked at me for a moment, nodded once, and pulled the door closed behind him. I heard Tommy's voice in the hallway, animated now, responding to something Diana had said, the voice of a young man who had just had the floor open beneath him and discovered to his considerable surprise that what was underneath was solid ground. I listened to it for a moment, that voice, and felt something move through my chest that was not quite pride and not quite grief, but lived somewhere in the territory between them, in the specific country that exists only for fathers and the people they watch become themselves. Then the hallway quieted, and I was alone in the boardroom. I did not move immediately. I stood at the head of the table for a long moment, looking at the room, at the board packets still stacked at one end, at the court order. Claire had left on the table at the water glasses that had not all been touched, at the empty chairs, arranged with the precise impersonal geometry of a room that had held an enormous amount of human weight and was now simply a room again. I walked slowly to the far end of the table. I stood in front of the chair Ethan had occupied for the past hour, the chair where he had sat with his new suit and his careful confidence, and his hands that had eventually stopped gripping the armrests and simply given up. The chair was pushed back slightly from the table, the way a chair looks when someone has left it in a hurry, or when someone has left it with the last of their energy and had none remaining to push it back in. On the table, in front of the chair, the rings were still there. Vanessa's engagement ring and wedding band sitting in the center of the polished oak, catching the morning light from the east-facing windows. Small and ordinary, and entirely out of place in this room, the way personal things always look out of place in professional rooms, too specific, too human, too much the evidence of a particular life for the anonymous surfaces of a boardroom to absorb. I picked them up. They were lighter than I expected. 7 years of marriage, and they weighed almost nothing in my palm. I held them for a moment, then set them down again. I did not know what the right thing to do with them was. I suspected there was no right thing. I pulled Ethan's chair out and sat down in it. I do not know precisely why I did that. It was not a calculated gesture. It was the kind of thing a person does when they are very tired and the nearest chair is there, and the body makes a decision before the mind has time to object. I sat in my son's chair at the far end of the table and looked back up the length of the room toward the head, where I had been sitting an hour ago. This was what he had wanted. This view, this position. The long table stretching out before him, the city visible through the windows. On 3 sides, the particular authority that comes from sitting at a table where serious decisions are made, and having everyone in the room look toward you when they need to know what comes next. He had wanted it so badly that he had been willing to take it by force, and I had given it to someone else, not as a punishment. That was important to me sitting there in his chair, that I understood my own motivations clearly. I had not given Carter Global to Tommy Reyes to punish Ethan Carter. I had given it to Tommy Reyes because Tommy Reyes was the right person to have it, and because the company deserved to be in the right hands, and because 40 years of building something does not end with handing it to someone who will only diminish it. My phone rang. "Harold, how did it go?" he asked when I answered. I looked at the empty room around me, the pushed-back chair, the rings on the table, the court order, the city outside the windows, doing what cities do, which is continue regardless of what happens inside the buildings that constitute them. "It went exactly as it needed to, Harold," I said. A pause. "And Ethan," I thought about the sound he had made with his face in his hands. I thought about his back in the doorway, the specific set of his shoulders when he said, "I am sorry, Dad," not to my face, but to the room, to the air, to whatever version of me he could manage to address when he could not bring himself to turn around. "He apologized," I said. Harold was quiet for a moment. "That is something," he said. "Yes," I said. "It is." Another pause, the comfortable kind. The kind that Harold and I had developed across 38 years of knowing each other well enough to share silences without filling them unnecessarily. Then Harold said, "What are you going to do now?" I looked at the rings on the table. I looked at the long room, the empty chairs, the morning light still moving across the oak surface the way it had moved across it for 40 years of mornings. "I am going to go back to work," I said. Harold made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but carried the warmth of one. "Of course you are," he said. I ended the call and sat for another moment in Ethan's chair, in the quiet of the empty room, with the city going about its business on the other side of the glass. I thought about Gerald Whitmore in his rental apartment in Dover. I thought about the old man in the courtyard at Meadow Glen, his face turned up toward the morning sky, with the patience of a man who had learned that patience was the only currency that still spent. I thought about Ethan at 12 years old standing in the kitchen on a Saturday morning, trying to make pancakes without waking me up, and failing spectacularly, and laughing about it when I appeared in the doorway. I let myself think about that for exactly as long as it took to feel it fully. Then I stood up straightened my jacket, and pushed the chair back in. I walked to the door and opened it. Diana was in the hallway, her tablet under her arm, her expression carrying the careful neutrality of someone who had been waiting to take a read on how I was before deciding what to say. She looked at my face, and whatever she found there appeared to satisfy some internal question she had been holding. "Are you all right, Mr. Carter?" she asked. I considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. The honest answer was complicated. I was 65 years old, and I had just watched my son arrested would be too strong a word. He had not been arrested, he had simply been ended professionally and financially and matrimonially in the space of a single morning. I had sat in his empty chair and held 2 rings that weighed almost nothing and thought about pancakes on a Saturday morning. I was not all right in the way that people mean when they ask that question, hoping for a simple answer. But I was something. I was standing. I was clear-eyed. I was after everything, still the man who had built the thing that was going to outlast all of this. "I will be Diana," I said. "I will be." I walked toward the elevator. Behind me, the boardroom was empty and quiet, the morning light doing its slow, indifferent work across the polished oak table, the city going about its enormous business below, and somewhere in the building, a 28-year-old man named Tommy Reyes was meeting his board for the first time and not coming empty-handed to the room. My office was exactly as I had left it that morning. The legal pad on the corner of the desk. The cold coffee from 6 a.m. that I had forgotten to throw away. The framed site plan of my first commercial building, a 4-story mixed-use property in Lower Manhattan that I had broken ground on in 1986 with 12 investors, a borrowed excavator, and a level of confidence that in retrospect was either visionary or delusional, depending on how generously you read the history. I closed the door behind me and stood in the middle of the room for a moment, not moving toward the desk or the window or the bar cart in the corner, just standing in the space the way you stand in a room after something large has passed through it and you are taking stock of what remains. Quite a lot remained, as it turned out. I walked to the window. 42 floors below Manhattan was doing what Manhattan always did in the middle of a weekday morning, moving loudly and in several directions, simultaneously, entirely indifferent to the specific human dramas unfolding in the buildings above it. Yellow cabs and delivery trucks and people in good shoes, walking fast, with their eyes on their phones, the whole compressed, relentless machinery of the city, running at full speed, without pausing, to ask whether any individual piece of it was all right. I had always found that comforting. The city's indifference was not cruelty. It was continuity. It was the assurance that the world did not hinge on any single person's worst day. Marcus knocked and entered without waiting his particular privilege after 20 years and set a fresh cup of coffee on the corner of my desk. He removed the cold one without comment. He looked at me at the window, looked at the desk, looked at the door he had come through as though reviewing the route he might take back out. And then he looked at me again. "The U.S. Attorney's Office called while you were in the boardroom," he said. "They want a meeting next week to go through the full evidentiary package. Claire will handle the preliminary prep." "Good," I said. "Ethan's access credentials have been revoked across all systems. His office on the 38th floor has been secured." A pause. "His personal items are still there. I did not know if you wanted to box them," I said. "Send them to wherever he ends up. He will let us know." Marcus nodded. He started toward the door, then stopped. He turned back with the expression he wore when he had something to say that did not fit into any of the categories our professional relationship normally covered. "For what it is worth," Marcus said, "I have worked for a great many people in my career. I have worked for people with more money than you, and people with more power than you, and people who were considerably more frightening than you on a bad day." He paused. "I have never worked for anyone who built what you built, and then had the discipline to protect it, the way you protected it this month." He held my gaze for a moment. It was a privilege to be in that room this morning. I looked at him, at Marcus Webb, 52 years old, who had answered the phone on the second ring on Father's Day night, and told me he had been waiting for 20 years to be certain before he said anything. Who had prepared files I had not asked for and given me the time to be sure, and who had told me simply and without drama that I deserved certainty. "Thank you, Marcus," I said. He nodded once and left. I turned back to the window. The coffee was hot this time. I held the cup in both hands and let the warmth move through my palms, and I looked out at the city and let my mind go quiet, in the specific way it went quiet after a long operation was finished, not empty, not peaceful exactly, but settled. The way a body settles after a sustained effort. The way the air settles after a storm has moved through and taken everything it came for. I thought about the old coat hanging on the rack by the door. I had put it on this morning before I left the house, not the charcoal suit I had worn to the boardroom, but the old overcoat, the one with the frayed cuff and the worn collar that Mrs. Paulson had offered to replace 3 times, and I had declined each time. I had put it on because I needed to remember who I was before I walked into that room and did what needed to be done. I had changed into the suit in the private bathroom off my office when I arrived, and I had put the coat on the rack where it had been hanging all morning, while the world I had built was dismantled and reassembled in the space of 2 hours. It was still there, slightly rumpled, entirely itself. I set the coffee down. I walked to the rack, took the coat off the hook, and put it on over the charcoal suit, which was not how one was supposed to wear a charcoal suit. But I had stopped being interested in how things were supposed to be worn sometime around my 55th birthday, and the coat fit, the way it had always fit, which was imperfectly and completely, and it smelled faintly of Connecticut and pine and the particular mixture of motor oil and fresh air that clung to it from a morning drive 38 years ago that I still thought about more than I could adequately explain. I picked up the coffee again. I thought about Tommy Reyes somewhere in this building sitting across a conference table from people who were beginning to understand what he was made of. I thought about the Kings County docket printed from the public filing system and highlighted in yellow placed on a desk by a 28-year-old who had stayed late because the work was not finished, and he was the kind of person who did not leave until it was. I thought about Ethan. I let myself do that for a moment, not the Ethan of the last 3 weeks, not the Ethan in the booth at Maison Laurent, laughing about permits and clueless old men, but the other one. The one who had stood in the kitchen on a Saturday morning at 12 years old, flour on his shirt, trying to do something kind for his father and making a spectacular mess of it and finding it funny, both of us finding it funny, the kitchen full of smoke and the sound of it. That boy had existed. He had been real, whatever had come after. I did not know what would happen to Ethan Carter. I did not know if the federal proceedings would result in charges or what form his life would take on the other side of this morning. I did not know if the apology he had given to the doorframe rather than to my face had been the beginning of something, or simply the last words of a version of him that was now over. I knew that I would not close the door. I would not chase him. I would not call him tonight, or send word through Marcus, or create any structure that made it easier for him to avoid the full weight of what he had done and what it had cost. But I would not close the door. That was the thing about doors, you could leave them open without standing in them. You could make the offer of return without making return easy, and in the space between those two things, if there was anything worth saving, it would find its way through. I finished the coffee. I set the cup down on the desk, straightened the legal pad beside it, and looked around the office one more time at the framed site plan of the first building at the window, and the city beyond it at the old coat that had no business being worn over a charcoal suit. Then I picked up my phone and called down to the front desk. "This is Richard Carter," I said. "Please let Tommy Reyes know that when he has a moment between meetings, I would like to take him to lunch. Somewhere with a good ribeye. His choice of day." I ended the call. I walked to the door, opened it, and stepped out into the hallway. The floor was busy, phones ringing, people moving between offices. The ordinary productive noise of a company that had been built to outlast the people who built it and was doing exactly that. Someone called out a greeting as I passed. I raised a hand in return without slowing down. At the end of the hallway, the elevator bank waited. I pressed the button and stood in front of the closed doors, my old coat over my suit. My coffee finished, the city visible through the window at the end of the hall, in the particular clear morning light that made Manhattan look briefly like something that had been built on purpose by people who knew what they were doing for reasons that were going to last. The elevator arrived. The doors opened. I stepped inside, and the doors closed behind me, and I rode down toward the city in the quiet of the descending car, and I felt for the first time in a very long time entirely like myself. I have told you my story. Now let me tell you what it taught me. I spent 65 years believing that love was enough to protect the people I gave it to. I was wrong. Love without boundaries is not generosity, it is an invitation. And some people, when given an invitation, will walk through every room of your life and take everything that is not bolted down. Do not make my mistake. Do not wait for proof before you pay attention. The people who mean to take from you will always use your love as the blindfold. I am not a perfect father. I am not a perfect man. But I believe, and this is something God has shown me in the hardest possible way, that the truth always surfaces. Always. No matter how carefully someone buries it. If there is one thing I want you to carry from this grandpa story, it is this: your dignity is not negotiable. Your legacy is not a gift to be stolen. And the moment someone mistakes your patience for weakness, it is time to remind them exactly who built the room they are standing in. This has been one man's family story, imperfect, painful, and entirely true in the ways that matter. If this grandpa story stayed with you, leave a comment below and tell me what you would have done differently. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you believe that every family story deserves to be told, honestly, subscribe to this channel. There are more coming. Because every Grandpa Stories collection begins with someone brave enough to speak first. Thank you for staying until the end.